What's up, everyone? So today I'm going to do part two of the interview expenses video. It's a lot of stuff, but let's get to it. If you haven't already, make sure you watch part one. There's a lot of stuff there that I will not be talking about in this video. More specifically, in the last video, I discussed the cost of primary applications and the cost of secondary applications. And in this video, I will be talking specifically about interviews, specifically the flights that you have to take for interviews, the cost of living at interviews, because when you go to interviews, you obviously have to sustain yourself. You have to buy food and all that stuff. So you have to factor that cost in. And then there's also going to be the cost of second look weekend. I'm going to talk about what that is. And then miscellaneous cost, which I'm going to talk about, can include a lot of things. And I'm going to talk about what it included for me because I have kept documentation of everything. So this is going to be a bit long, so let's just get straight into it. The flights for interviews. So all interview flight costs are covered by you. And believe it or not, that's something that not a lot of people know, but you have to buy your own flights. I know people who apply to PhD programs, they are sometimes subsidized for flights. Not for med schools, unfortunately. That can be costly. And let me just give you some general gist. For me, it was about $400 round trip if I wanted to go to the East Coast because I'm from California. But if I was within California, it was anywhere between 50 to 80 bucks for one way, which would mean like overall, if you do a complete round trip, that could be over 100 bucks. So that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, flights can be expensive. However, if you make sure that you do your planning ahead of time, unlike myself, never planned, but if you plan ahead of time, you can't, afford it, make sure you can talk to these schools. The schools are nicer than you think. But let me show you my flight costs. So I've done a decent amount of traveling, and my total flight cost ended up being $1,876. That's a lot of money. And specifically, to put this into context, if you go to the next page, you'll see that I was lucky, very, very lucky, to attend about 11 interviews, which is a lot. And I had to go, fly around the nation. It was a great time. I actually loved it because I was taking a gap year and I got to see all these different states that I'd never seen before. But if you factor my total cost and divide it by the number of interviews I had, it's about $170 per interview. So if you wanted to get an idea of how much on average a flight would cost for an interview, obviously it would vary if it was on the East Coast or West Coast. It was about 171 bucks. And here's some fun facts that I also kept track of because I'm a nerd, and I kept track of how much time I spent on the plane. But I spent over 3 days on a plane. 79.5 hours were spent on a plane just flying. So if you don't already have something to do on the plane, make sure you get something because that's a lot of time to be on this plane. And I got over 8,000 Southwest points. I stuck to one flight for all of my one carrier, aka Southwest, for all of my flights. And I'm going to tell you that's a good idea because you're going to get points. I know a lot of you out there will be like, but what if there's another flight that's cheap? Or what if there's another flight that gives me this? No, screw it. Stick to one flight. By sticking to one flight, you will save a ton of money in the long run because you'll get points for it. When you get points, you can, get a ton of flights for free. And I actually got I think there were about 4 or 5 flights. I think I saved over 500 bucks in terms of points just because I was able to use points to get flights. All right. Let me give you some tips here. All right. I already told you, stick to one flight. What I mean by that is if you want to fly United, just fly United, okay? I know it might be a bit more expensive sometimes. It might be less expensive on Southwest sometimes. Just stick to one flight. The amount of points you get, I guarantee you, is going to offset the amount that you pay by a bit, amount more you might have to pay by a bit for certain flights because those points will rack up, all right? The other thing is, here's another tip, okay? I did this and I was able to get I did this for United. You can apply for credit cards with flights to get extra miles. So when I was flying around, my dad and I realized that there was a Chase credit card deal, which got me like 50,000 miles on United. And I was like, I don't usually fly United, but if I apply for this credit card and get 50,000 miles, that'd be a good idea. So I did that and I actually got it was 50,000 miles is enough for 2 free flights from here to Boston and back. And so that's about like 400 bucks, right? That's a lot of money that I was able to save. So if you apply for those credit cards, you can totally save a ton of money, all right? So make sure you look into that because Southwest has one, United has one, all the big airline carriers have one. So definitely look into those. And the last thing is, I know it's usually not up to you, but if you have interviews on the East Coast, and let's say you're a West Coast kid, you might want to try to see if you can schedule them together. Some med schools are okay with you emailing them and saying, hey, I'm going to be in the area. If you happen to know if I'm going to get an interview and if you could schedule that interview during this time, I'd greatly appreciate it. I wasn't able to get lucky in that sense. I wasn't able to schedule all my East Coast interviews at once, but you really can look into doing that if you want, because that will save you time. Because I can tell you right now, let me give you an example, right? There's schools in New York, like Cornell is right next to Columbia, which is right next to Mount Sinai. All three of those schools, and then Boston University is nearby. All those East Coast schools can be very close. So what you can do is, let's say you get an interview at Boston University, you can actually email those other schools you applied to in the area and tell them, hey, I'm interviewing at Boston on this day. If you happen to have time during that like region and you know you might be interviewing me, please let me know, and it would really help me save a ton of money. I did that for a couple schools. It didn't work out for the best, but it's better to at least try it, because that could save you $400. Like if I had to go to Boston University and then I came back home and I got another interview at like Mount Sinai and I have to go back, that's another $400 that I could have saved if I just scheduled them together. That is a major, major money saver, and I know a ton of friends who do that, and it can be very, very beneficial. So those are just some interview flight tips. All right, but now those interview flights are entirely different from the interview expenses. Once you're at the interview itself, what are you doing? Are you going to be staying at a hotel? Are you going to be eating food? Are you going to be Ubering from the airport to where your school is? All of that also costs money, all right? And you have to factor that in. I kept track of all of this as well. I have all my data, so don't think I'm making any of this up. But for me, I actually spent about $1,000, $1,100 from October to February. So my first interview was in October. My last interview was February 1st, and I spent well over $1,100 just on like living when I was in interviews. This is a bit inflated for me because when I went to interview at a place, I didn't just stay for one day. I was like, I want to take my time. I haven't been to Boston ever in my life. I haven't been to, Texas ever in my life. So when I went to these places, I stayed for 3-4 days. I explored, and that's why I have all these vlogs. I wanted to make sure I got to see the city because I'm like, I don't even know if I'll ever come here again. So I had my fun. So my interview expenses are obviously a bit more inflated because I stayed for longer than just one day. Like let me give you an example. When I went to Maryland, I actually stayed and I explored DC. I explored all that area near DC. I got to see Virginia. All that jazz was really good, but I wouldn't have done that. That like inflated my cost of living because I was staying there for a longer amount of time. Nonetheless, it's up to you. This number, I spent about $101.6 per interview. It could be much lower if you don't stay there for as long. On average, I would say for every interview I went to, I'd stay there for about 3 to 4 days because I wanted to make the most of my gap year. I know it's a bit more expensive, but it's like I didn't know when I'm gonna have a chance to travel again, and you want to make the most of that time. All right, so that was my interview expenses. So about $1,100. It's a lot, but you only live once, and you don't do medicine for the money, and it's a death sentence anyway, so might as well enjoy it, right? Now, let me tell you how to minimize the expenses, right? Lots of schools provide student hosts. Use them. What I mean by that is when you get an interview at a school, you can opt to stay with a student host. It's not guaranteed, but most of the time it works out. You should usually do that. Like I never stayed at a hotel because my interview expenses would be way more if I did. So if you stay with the student host, you save the cost of living at a hotel for however long. And on top of that, you get to meet the student, you get to ask them questions, you can learn about the school. That's always good. Another big tip, as I already told you, is try to plan travel to similar schools at the same time to minimize hosting expenses. So, if you're going to go to Boston, make sure you try to email all the schools in Boston and see like, hey, I'm going to be in the area. If you want to interview me, please let me know. That would be really beneficial to me. These are known as in the area emails. Most schools are very receptive to them. Other schools might not be. You have to look them up and see if they are. Most schools are. So if you have any questions about what schools do accept in the area emails, let me know because I can let you know which schools I sent in the area emails to. Here's another thing. When I went to Virginia, I stayed with the student host for about a day. But another thing I did is I had friends in Virginia. I have family friends in Virginia, so I stayed with them for over 5 days, and they showed me around. And I hadn't seen them for well over 10 years. And so it was a really great way for me to explore the city, rejuvenate this old friendship of these friends I had never seen in ages. It was so fun. We got to see everything. We hung out all the time. We had a ton of fun. And that's what I meant. Interview season is not just a time for you to crap in your pants and be like, oh my God, I'm so scared. It's a time for you to get to explore a state you've never been to. Take advantage of that. All right, and really reach out to anyone. Like when I went to another city nearby, there was a friend I went to elementary school with, but I hadn't seen her since then. But I reached out to her. I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna be in your town. I don't know if you happen to be free," but she was, and she was willing to host me, and it was really nice. Got to meet up with her, catch up with her, and it was a great time. So these two tips can really help you minimize your interview expenses. All right. So now let's move on to the total interview cost. So I told you I've spent about $1,800 on flights. $1,100 on interview expenses. It's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. I'm definitely not downplaying the role of money. It's a lot. I've been working a lot as well to kind of recuperate this. And yeah, you know, no doubt about it, it's a lot. But at least now you guys know I'm being transparent. I'm not trying to show you I spent all this money because I want to talk about how much it sucks. I'm not trying to show you I spent all this money because I want to talk about how many interviews I had. I'm trying to purely show you this because I want to increase transparency so you guys have a better idea of how much money you might want to save up or how much money you might need if you're interviewing at a certain number of schools / applying to a certain number of schools. And I really hope this helps. So now let's move on to the next thing, which is second look weekends. So congratulations, you were accepted to med school. That's the biggest accomplishment in the world. I would give you all a hug because I know it. Trust me, just getting in is a big accomplishment. But once you're accepted, medical schools invite you back, and honestly, it's a really good idea to go back because they have lots of festivities and they cover most of the expenses. But you still usually have to pay for flights. So when I had my second look weekend for a school just this last week. I went back and it was a great time. I loved it. I met my potential future classmates. I got to, see what the campus was like, all that stuff. But unfortunately, you usually still have to cover the flight costs. But again, if you do think that you're financially strained or you don't think you'd be able to, don't let that be a barrier. $25 on just the flight. But once I was there, I didn't spend that much on expenses. I was actually there for about 5 days. That's a long time to be. The second look weekend was about 3 days, and then I was just doing stuff around the city and got dinner and lunch with different friends I had there. So I spent about $500 at second look weekend. Again, I know it's a lot. But again, if you let money dictate everything you do in your life, you wouldn't enjoy anything. So you gotta, when you're enjoying, when you're having a good time, just have a good time. I guarantee you the money is always gonna be a downer, but you gotta find a way around it, and hopefully this helps. All right, so that's second look weekend. Next up, this is the most important part. The out of the cost of going to med school that isn't talked about anywhere else. So there's a lot of expenses that aren't categorized in everything I talked about. Primary, secondaries, interviews, and then second look weekend. There's a lot of other stuff. Like, for example, buying the MSAR. There's books that will help you learn about the MMI. I bought a book that would help me learn about the MMI. That costs money. There's formal clothing, buying your suits, ties. There's also letter of rec services. So let me show you what these like extraneous expenses are. In my case, these extraneous expenses tended to be, let's see. So this is my image here. I spent money on the MSAR. I bought my transcript on 2-day shipping, which was $32. My interfolio, which was my letter of rec service, was $19. And then delivering my interfolio letters to all the schools were about $6. I bought a MMI book just because I didn't know what the MMI was, and that was about $29. And then I bought my full-on interview clothing, which was about $140. That ended up being about $260 of that out-of-cost extraneous spending. That is a lot of money, but hey, I wanted to put it all out there. Now you guys have all my information. You know where it's coming from. And so if we add all this up, from my previous video, this is my primaries, my secondary expenses, my interview flights, my interview costs, my second look weekend, and my miscellaneous. That adds up to well over $7,500. But again, my interview season went from October to February. So October, November, December, January, February. It's about 5 months. But if you count when this whole season started, which was in June, it's from June all the way to now, which is March. So I'd say, what is that? March, April, May, June. So that's about 9 months. $7,500 divided by 9 months. I don't actually know. What is that? That's like $800. Yeah, about $800 a month. It's a ton. But if you have a full-time job, it can work out. But again, if you reach out, it can help to med schools. They will be willing to help you, I'm sure, subsidize some costs if you are in need of it. So some generic tips. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Applying is expensive. I know it's expensive, but definitely save up for the cycle. Hopefully now you guys have a better idea of how much you need to save. Part-time jobs do help a lot. Full-time jobs even more so. And stay with friends. Ask for hosts. Those are great ways to save money. Overall, this was part 2. I told you it was going to be a bit longer, but I hope you guys got a lot out of it. If you have any questions for me, feel free to let me know. Shoot me an email. My email's open to all of you. I'm always here to help. I know this whole applying cycle is not transparent. Most people don't even talk about where they applied. Most people don't like talking about where they interviewed. It's this whole I don't want to talk about anything because it's scary. But let's get over that. We're all here to help each other. We're all trying to be doctors. Let's help each other in the process. So if you guys have any questions for me, let me know. But hopefully this video was helpful. Please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Really appreciate it. You want to check out any of my other videos? There's going to be one right here. Another link to one of my videos right here. And another video right here. Why not? I'll put one video right over here. And last but not least, If you want to subscribe to this channel, really appreciate it, because I'm still an early YouTuber trying to get it down. But a subscription button should be right over here. So please subscribe. Cool. Thanks. See you guys in the next one. Hope you find these videos helpful.